everyone, my name is Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Reading with Stonesy. Today we are reading chapters 23 to 27, pages 141 to 163. Uh-oh, says the reader. Now, Stonesy Boy, how are you going to read 22 pages today? Well, you should also be asking how I'm going to read 5 chapters today, because I'm going to have 4 breaks in it, you silly little biscuit. That's how. So this is the second to final episode. Next episode is so ridiculously short that it's not even funny. So, without further ado, on this hodgepodge, let's begin. Chapter 23. The hunters left many wounded otter behind them. Some floated in, died on the shore, and others spilled with the spears since they were suffering and could not live. But I found the young otter was not badly hurt. It lay in a bed of bull kelp, and I would have paddled my way to Rontu if it had not barked. A strand of kelp was wound on its body, and though it was sleeping, for often more they go to sleep, they anchor themselves in this way and keep from drifting off. Since I saw there was a deep gash across its back, the otter did not try to swim away as I drew near and reached over to the side of the canoe. They have large eyes, especially when they're young, but this one were so large from fear and pain that I could see my reflection on them. I cut the kelp that held it, and took a tide pool behind the reef, which was sheltered from the waves. They was calm before the storm. I caught up to the fish along the reef. I was careful to keep them alive, because otter would not eat anything that is dead. I left them in the pool. It was early in the morning. That afternoon I went back to the pool. The fish had disappeared and the young otter was asleep, floating on its back. I did not try to treat its wound with herbs, because salt water heals and the herbs would have washed off anyway. I brought 2 fish every day and left them in the pool. The otter would not eat while I was watching. Then I brought 4 fish, and these also disappeared, and finally 6, which seemed to be the right number. I brought them whether the day was calm or stormy. The otter grew, and its wound began to heal, and it still stayed in the pool, and now it came to the waiting for me, and would take the fish from my hand. The pool was not big. It would easily have gotten out of the way into the sea, yet it stayed there, and I slept or waited for me to come with food. The young otter now was at length of my arm and very glossy. He had a long nose, and it came to the point of many whiskers on each side, and largest eyes I've ever seen. They would watch me all the time I was at the pool, follow me whatever I did, and when I said something, they would move around in a very funny way, in a way, too, that made pain come from my throat, because they were gay and sad also. For the long time I called it otter, as I had called Rontu dog, and I decided to give the otter a name. The name was Manai, which means little boy with large eyes. This was a hard task, catching fish every day, especially if the wind was blowing and the waves were high. Once when I could catch only 2 and drop them into the pool, Manati ate them quickly and waited for more. Then he found that all he swam around a circle, looking at me reproachfully. The waves were high, and the next day I could not fish on the reef even though it's high, and since I had nothing to give him, I did not go to the pool. It was 3 days before I could catch fish. When I went there again, the pool was deserted. I knew that he would leave someday, but I felt bad that he'd gone back to the sea, but I would never catch fish for him again, nor would I know him if I saw him again in the kelp, for now he had grown and his wound had healed, and he looked back at all the others. Soon after the Aleut had left, I moved back to the headland. Nothing seemed harmed except for a fence, which I mended in a few days, and the house was the same as before. The only thing that worried me was all the abalones I had gathered. The summer were gone. I would need to live from day to day, and I'd catch, trying to get enough on the days I would fish the last of the times when I could not. Though the first part of the winter before Manatee returned was sometimes hard to do, afterwards it was not so hard, and Rontu I had always enough to eat. While the Aleuts were on the island, I had no chance to catch little smelts and dry them, and the nights that winter were dark, and I went to bed early, worked only during the day. I still had to make another string, for my fishing spear had many hooks and abalone shell, and last of all earrings to match the necklace Tuktak had given me. These took a long time, for I had searched for the beach many mornings when the tide was out, and I found only 2 pebbles of the same color in the stones of the necklace and soft enough to cut. The holes in the earrings took even more time, for the stones were hard to hold, but when I was done, I rubbed them bright and fine sand and water, and fastened them to bone hooks to fit my ears. They were very pretty. On sunny days, I would wear them in my cormorant dress, the necklace, and walk along the cliff in the Ronto. I often thought of Tutaka, but on these days especially, I would look often to the north and wish that they were there to see me. I would hear her talking in a strange language, and I would make things up as to say to her, and things for her to say to me. Chapter 24. Spring again was time of flowers. Water ran by the ravines and flowed down to the sea. Many birds came back to the island. Thanor and Lurai built a nest in the tree where they were born. They built it of dry seaweed and leaves, and also with hairs of Rontu's back. Whether he was in the yard while it was being made, they would swoop down as if he were not looking, and snap a bite full of fur and fly away. He did not like that, and he finally hid from them until the nest was finished. I had been right in giving a girl's name to Lurai, for she laid speckled eggs, and, with some help from their mate, hatched two ugly fledglings which soon became beautiful. I made up names for them and clipped their wings before they were long. They were tame as their parents. I also found a young gull that had fallen from the nest and beach below. Gulls make their nests high on the cliffs in the hollow places of the rocks. These places are usually small, and often I had watched a young one teetering on the edge of the nest and wondered why it did not fall. They seldom did. This one, which was white and yellow beak, was not badly hurt, and he had a broken leg. I took him back to the house and bound the bones together with two small sticks and sinew. For a while he did not try to walk. Then, because he was not old enough to fly, he began to hobble around the yard. With the young birds and the old ones, the white gull and Rontu was always trotting by my heels. The yard seemed a happy place. If only I had remembered to talk. If only I had not wondered about my sister Elape, where she was, and if the marks she had drawn upon her cheeks had proved magical. If they had, she was now married to Nanko, and the mother of many children. She would have smiled to see all of mine, which were so different from ones I had wished to have. Early that spring I had started to gather abalones, and gathered many, taken to the headland to dry. I wanted to have a good supply ready if the Aleuts came again. One day at the reef, filling my canoe, I saw a herd of otter and a kelp nearby, and was chasing through the other, putting their heads to the kelp and then going under the rope, coming up again in a different place. It was like a game we used to play in the brush when we were children on the island. I looked for a Manai, but each of them was like the other. I filled my canoe with abalones and paddled toward the shore, one of the otter following me. As I stopped, he dived and came up in front of me. He was far away, yet even I knew who it was. I never thought I would be able to tell him from the others, assured that I was Manai, but I held up one fish and I had caught it. Otter swim very fast, and therefore I could take a breath. He had snatched it from my hand. For 2 moons I did not see him, and then one morning while I was fishing he came suddenly out of the kelp. Behind him were 2 baby otter. They were about the size of puppies and moved along so slowly at time to time. Manai had to urge them on. Sea otter cannot swim when they are first born and have to hold on to their mother. Little by little, she teaches their babies by brushing them away with her flippers, then swimming around them in circles until they learn to follow. Manai came close to the reef, and I threw fish in the water. He did not snatch it as he usually did, but waited to see what the young otter would do. When they seemed more interested in me than in food, the fish started to swim away. He seized up in sharp teeth and tossed it in front of them. I threw another fish into the water for Manai, but he did the same thing as before. Still, the babies would not take the food, and at last, tired of playing with it, swam over and began to nuzzle him. Only then did I know that Manai was their mother, otter mate for life, and the mother dies, the father often weighs the babies the rest he can. This is what I thought happened to Manai. I looked down at the little family swimming beside the reef. Manai, I said, I'm going to give you a new name. It's Wanai. It fits you because it means girl with large eyes. The young otter grew fast and soon were taking fish by hand, but Wanai liked abalones better. She would let the abalone I tossed in her sink to a bottom and then dive and coming up, holding it against her body with a rock held in her mouth. She would then float on her back with abalone on her breast and strike it again and again with the rock until the shell was broken. She taught her young to do this, and sometimes I sat on the reef all morning, watched the 3 of them pounding their hard shells against their breasts. If all otters did not eat abalones this way, I have thought it was a game played by Wanai just to please me. But they all did, and I always wondered about it, and I wonder to this time. After that summer, after being friends with Wanai and her young, I never killed another otter. I had an otter cape for my shoulders, which I used until I wore out, but never again did I make a new one. Nor did I ever kill another cormorant for his beautiful feathers, though they have long, thick necks that make ugly sounds when they talk to each other. Nor did I kill seeds for the sinews, using instead the kelp to bind things when they're needed. Nor did I kill another wild dog, nor did I try to spear another sea elephant. Ulape would have laughed at me, and the others would have laughed too, my father the most of all. Yet this is the way I felt about the animals who had become my friends, and thus who were not. But in time could be. If Ulape and my father had come back and laughed, and all the others had come back and laughed, still I wouldn't have felt the same way, for animals and birds are like people too, though they do not talk the same or do the same things. Without them, the earth would be an unhappy place. Chapter 25. The Aleuts never came to the island of the Blue Dolphins, but every summer I watched for them. In early spring I gathered shellfish, which I tried and stored in a cave where I kept my canoe. 2 winters after they left, I made more weapons, a spear and a bow, a quiver of arrows. These also stored in a place beneath the headland, so if the hunters returned, I would be ready for another part of the island, to move from cave to cave, living in my canoe if necessary. For many summers after the Aleuts had gone to the herd, otter left Coral Cove. The old otter, which had survived the Aleuts' spears, and by now were aware of the summer that was time of the danger, would leave the herd away. They went far off the kelp beds of Tall Rock, where they stayed until the first storms of winter. Often Rontu and I would go out to the rock and live there for several days, catching fish for Wanai and the others I had come to know. One summer the otter did not leave, the summer that Rontu died. and I knew then that none of the other who remembered the hunters were left. Nor did I think of them, nor often more of the white man who would say they would come back, but did not come. Until that summer, I had kept count of all the moons since the time my brother and I were alone upon the island. For each one that came and went, I cut a mark on the pole beside the door of my house. There were many marks, from the roof to the floor, but after that summer, I did not cut them any more. The passing of the moons now did come to mean little. I only made marks for the count the 4 seasons of the year. The last year, I did not count those. It was late in the summer that Rontu died. Days since spring, whenever I went to reef to fish, he would not go with me unless I urged him to. He liked to lie in the sun in front of the house, and I let him, but I did not go as often in the past. I remember the night that Rontu stood at the fence and barked for me to let him out. Usually he did this when the moon was big, and he came back in the morning, but that night he was noon, there was no moon, and he did not return. I waited all day for him until dusk, and then went out to look for him. I saw his track and followed him over the dunes and the hill and the lair he had once lived, where I found him lying on his back in a cave alone. At first I thought he had been hurt, yet there were no wounds on him. He touched my hand with his tongue, but only once, and then he was quiet and scarcely breathed. Since night had fallen, it was too dark for me to carry Rontu back. I stayed there and sat beside him through the night and talked to him. At dawn, I took him in my arms and left the cave. He was very light, as if something about him had already gone. The sun was up, and I went along the cliff. Coals were crying in the sky. He raised his ears at the sound, and I put them down, thinking of what he wished to bark at them. He always did. He raised his head and followed my eyes, but did not make a sound. Rontu, I said, you have always liked to bark at the seagulls. The whole mornings and afternoons you would bark at them now for me, but he did not look at them again. Slowly he walked to where I was standing and fell to my feet, put my hand on his chest. I could feel his heart beating, but it beat only twice, very slowly, loud and hollow like the waves on the beach, and then no more. Rontu, I cried. Oh, Rontu. I buried him on the headland, dug a hole in the crevice of the rock, digging for 2 days from dawn until the going down of the sun, and put them there, with some sand flowers and the stick he had liked to chase when I threw it, and covered him with tiny pebbles of many colors that I had gathered on the shore. Chapter 26. That winter I did not go to the reef at all. I ate the things I had stored and left my house only to get water at the spring. It was winter and the strong winds, rain, and wild seas that crashed against the cliffs, so I would not have gone out much even if Rontu had been there. During that time I made 4 snares from notched branches. In the summer once, when I was on my way to the place where the sea elephants live, I had been a young dog that looked like Rontu. He was running with one of the packs of the wild dogs, and though I caught only a glimpse of him, I was sure he was Rontu's son. He was larger than the other dogs and had heavier fur and yellow eyes. He ran in a graceful stride like Rontu's. In the spring, I planned to catch him with the snares I was making. Wild dogs came to the headland often during the winter, now that Rontu was gone, and when the worst of the storms were over, I set the snares outside the fence and baited him with fish. I caught several of the dogs the first time, but not one with yellow eyes, and since I was afraid to handle him, I was forced to let them free. I made more snares and set these again, but while the wild dogs did come close, they did not touch the fish. I catch a little red fox, which bit me when I took her out of the snare, yet she soon got over the wildness and would follow me around in the yard, begging for abalone. She was very much a thief. When I was away from the house, she always found some way to get into the food, no matter how well I hid it. So I got to let her go back in the ravine. Often, though, she would come back at night and scratch at the fence for food. I could not catch the young dogs with the snare, and I was trying to give up trying to, and I thought the tushulante weed, which we sometimes use to catch fish in the tide pools, it was not really a poison, but if you put in the water, the fish would turn over in their backs and float. I remember this weed and dug some where I knew grew on the far side of the island. I broke it up into small pieces, which I dropped in the spring where the wild dogs drank. I waited all day at the dusk, and pack came down in spring. They drank their fill of water, but nothing happened to them, or not much. They frisked around for a while as I watched them from brush and trotted away. I then remember Zushal, which some of the men of our tribe used. It was made from the ground up seashells and wild tobacco. I made a big bowl of this, mixing it with water, and put it in the spring. I hid in the brush and waited. The dogs came at dusk, and they sniffed the water and backed off and looked at each other, and then began to drink. Soon afterwards they began to walk around in circles. Suddenly they all lay down and went to sleep. There were 9 of them laying there in the spring. In the dim light, it was hard to tell one I wanted to take home. But finally I found him. He was snoring as if he had eaten a big meal, and I picked him up and hurried around the cliff. Being frightened all the way, he would wake up before I reached the headland. I pulled him through the opening under the fence and tied him to the thong with a thong, and I left food beside him to eat and some fresh water. Before long he was on his feet, gnawing through the thong. He howled and ran at the yard while I cooked my supper. All night he howled. With the dawn I went out to the house. He was asleep. While he lay there on the fence sleeping, I thought of different names for him, trying to first one and then another, saying him over and over. At last he looked so much fat like his father, I called him Rontu Aru, which means son of Rontu. The short time he made friends with me. He was not the larger Rontu, but his father's thick coat and his same yellow eyes. Often When I watched him chasing gulls in the sandpit and the reef, barking at the otter, I forgot he was not wrong too. He had many happy times that summer, fishing and going tall rock in our canoe, but more and more now I thought of Tutak and my sister Olape. Sometimes I would hear their voices in the wind, and often when I was on the sea, in the waves that lapped softly against the canoe. Chapter 27. After fierce storms of winter came many days when the wind did not blow, the air was heavy, that it was hard to breathe, and the sun so hot that the sea was like a sun itself, too bright to look at. The last day of the weather, I took the canoe from the cave and paddled around the reef and the sandpit. I did not like to take Rantu Aru with me, for like he liked the cold, he did not like the heat. It was good that he did not come with me. The day was the hottest of all, and the sea shimmered with red light. Over my eyes I wore shields made of wood, with small slits in them to see through. No gulls were flying, the otter lay quiet on the kelp, and the little crabs were deep in their holes. I pulled the canoe up on the beach, which was wet, but streaming from the sun. Early every spring, I took the canoe to the sandpit, spread fresh pitch in the cracks that I needed it. I worked all this morning, stopping from time to time to cool off in the sea. As the sun climbed high, I turned the canoe over and crawled under it and went to sleep in the shade. I had not slept long, and I was suddenly awakened by what I thought was thunder. But upon looking out from my shelter, I saw there was no clouds in the sky, yet the rumbling sound kept on, and it came from a distance from the south, and as I listened, grew louder. I jumped to my feet, and the first thing I caught my gaze was the gleaming stretch of beach in the southern slope of the sandpit. Never in my life on the island I see the tide so low. Rocks and small reefs, and I did not know where under the sea stood bare in the blinding lights. There was another place I had gone to sleep, and wakened in another island. The air was suddenly tight around me. There was a faint sound as some giant animal were sucking the air in through its teeth. The rumbling came close in the empty sky, filling my ears. Beyond the gleam of beach or the bare rocks and reefs, more than a league beyond them, I saw a great white crest moving upon the island. It seemed to move slowly between the sea and the sky, but as the sea itself, I tore the shields and wore over my eyes. In terror, I ran along the sandpit. I ran and stumbled, and got up and ran again. The sand shuddered under my feet, and the first wave struck, spray upon around me like rain. It was filled with pieces of kelp and small fish. By following the curve of the sandpit, I reached the cove and the trail that led to the mesa, but there was no time for this. Water was already rushing around my knees, holing from every direction. The cliff rose in front of me, and though the rocks were slippery in the sea moss, I found the hold for the hand and then a foot. Thus, a step at a time, I dragged myself upward. The crest of the wave passed under me and roared until I toward Coral Cove. For a time there was no sound. The sea began to seek its old place, running back along in long foaming currents. Before it would do, another great wave moved out of the south. Perhaps it would be even bigger than the first one. I looked up, and the cliff rose straight above me, and I would climb no farther. I stood facing the rock with my feet in the narrow edge, and one hand thrust in deep in the crack. Over my shoulder I could see the wave coming. It had not come fast, for the other wave was still running out. For a while I thought that it would not come at all, because the two suddenly met beyond the sandpit. First wave was trying to reach the sea, and the second one was struggling toward the shore. Like two giants, they crashed against each other. They rose high in the air, bending first one way and then the other. The roar was the great spears were breaking in battle, and the red light of the sun and the spray that flew around them looked like blood. Slowly, the second wave forced the first one backward, rolled slowly over it, and then, as the victor drags the vanquished, moved in toward the island. The wave struck in the cliff. It meant long tongues streaming around me that I could neither see nor hear. The tongues of water licked into all crevices, dragged in my hand, and bare feet gripping the ledge. They rose high above me along the face of the rock, up and up, and then spent themselves against the sky and fell back, hissing against past me to join the water rushing toward the cove. Suddenly all around me was quiet, and in the quiet I could hear my heart pounding. I knew my hand had still in a hole in the rock and that I was alive. Night came, and though I was afraid to leave the cliff, I knew that I would never stay here until morning, that I could go to sleep and fall. Neither could I find my way home, and so I climbed down the ledge and crouched at the foot of the cliff. Dawn was windless and hot. The sandpit was strewn with kills of kelp. Dead fish and lobsters and pink crabs lay everywhere, and two small whales were stranded against the rock walls of the cove. Far up the trail had led to the mesa. I found things from the sea. Rantu Aru was waiting for at the fence. When I crawled under to jump upon me and follow me around, never letting me out of his sight. I was glad to be home in the high headland where the waves had not come. He had been gone only from one sun to the next, yet it was like so many suns, like the time I had gone away in the canoe. Most of the day I slept, but I had many dreams. When I woke, everything around me was strange. The sea made no sounds on the shore, the gulls were quiet, and the earth seemed like the holding of breath, as though I were waiting for something terrible to happen. At dusk, I was coming back from the spring and the basket of water on my shoulder, walking along the cliff around to Aru everywhere. The ocean was smooth and yellow, and lay against the island, very tired. The gulls were still quiet, perched in their rocky nests. Slowly, the earth began to move. It moved away from my feet, and for a moment I felt like I was standing in air. Water tipped out of the basket and trickled over my face. When the basket fell to the ground, not knowing what I did, thinking foolishly of another wave was upon me, I began to run. But it was a wave, and a wave of earth, and it rippled under me along the cliff. As it ran, another wave undertook me. Looking back, I saw many of them coming from the south, like waves in the sea. The next thing I remember was lying on the ground, and Ronto Ara was beside me, and we're both trying to get to our feet. Then we're running again toward the headland, towards the house that kept moving off into the distance. The opening under the fence caved in, so I'd pull the rocks away before we crawled through. Night came, and the earth still rose and felt like the great animal breathing. I could hear rocks tumbling from the cliff, falling down into the sea. All night as we lay there in the house, the earth trembled and rocks fell, yet not a big one in the headland, which could have fallen if those who make the world shake had really been angry with us. In the morning the earth was quiet once more, and fresh the wind that smelled of kelp blew out in the northern sea. Wow, that was a lot of different things at once. But that is the end of today's episode. So, today we read chapters, totally have this prepared to just quickly copy and paste and totally didn't take till last second. Today we read chapters 23 to 27, pages 141 to 163. Next time we will be finishing this story off by reading pages 164 to 174. That's right, only 10 pages, but if you think that's short, we're actually reading only chapters 28 to 29. So we actually have a break, even though we have a short episode. How confusing. So, yeah. But you don't care about that. What you care about is the Gordon Setter. This is like the other doggy, except this one looks like a Rottweiler mix. Maybe he is. He's just a big old fat Rottweiler. Or I guess he's skinny considering the thing, but he's silly looking. But of course, you can't make fun of something without knowing its history. So, as such, we're going to read the history of the Gordon Setter. The Gordon Setter's history is that it's a black and tan setters existed in the Scotland at least by the 1600s, but it was not until the late 1700s that the breed became established as the Gordon the Castle Setter. The 4th Duke of Gordon kept many of these dogs at the Gordon Castle, thus lending to the breed its name. Efforts to breed the finest setters at Gordon Castle continue through the efforts of the Duke of Richmond after the 4th Duke's death. The 4th Duke's death. Although the breed's name had changed back to the black and tan setter around 1900, the name Gordon Setter was restored when the English Kennel Club registered the breed. Gordon Setters were the heaviest and slowest working of their setter breeds, and the distinction was accentuated when Gordons first entered the show ring in 1875. The trend toward an overly ponderous show Gordon was halted largely through the efforts of man, Robert Chapman. Unlike many sporting breeds, a little division between show and field type Gordons exists. Gordon Setters had arrived in America in the middle 1800s, were among the first breeds recognized by the AKC, receiving the nod of 1892. The breed and the favorite among the hunters, demanding one-man shooting dog, though it generally lacks the flash and speed of the other setter breeds. Although its steady following, it has never been popular as other pets, as their setters as a pet. So now that you know the history, your kids are like, well, if I get this dog now, then I'll be looking cool because I know the history, Dad, so I want it. But now you're like, hold on, son. Before I talk about this, we need to know the temperament. How do these dogs act? What, will they get easily angry? Are they good around kids? Well, the temperament of the Gordon Setter is that the Gordon Setter is capable, closely working bird dog, and it can run and hunt all day. This kind of energy needs a regular outlet for the dog is apt to become frustrated. Gordons take lively, enthusiastic companions and need the company of lively people. Somewhat more protected than the other setters, it is reserved towards strangers and sometimes aggressive towards strange dogs. The Gordon has earned its reputation as a devoted family dog. And the Gordon has earned its reputation as a devoted family dog. That's a really short temperament. But yeah, it's good with other dogs, not good with other people. So, keep an eye on that. Now, for some reason in your weird mind, you want this dog still. So, yeah. I want to know the upkeep. What do I have to do to keep this dog beautiful and healthy as he is? Well, the upkeep of the Gordon Setter is that the Gordon needs much strenuous exercise every day in order to stay in shape. It can live outdoors in temperate climates, but it must be able to spend ample time with people and does best dividing its time between inside and outside. Its coat needs regular brushing and combing every 2 to 3 days. In addition, some clipping and trimming is needed for optimal good looks. You want this dog to be good looking? You gotta work for it, baby. And you also have to groom and trim. This dog is your average Ken dog, except it loves the family. Unlike Ken, I guess. I never watched the Barbie movie. So, yeah, that's what you gotta know about that. So, any children listening to this, or any teachers showing the kids this, have cover their ears or something. This is only for adults and teenagers only. The health of the Gordon Setter is always the worst part for me. Their major concerns are CHD and gastric torsion. Basically, they have somewhat weak stomachs. The minor concerns are PRA, elbow dysplasia, cerebellar atrophy, and hydrothyroidism. Basically, just keep an eye on their ligaments, such as their arms, legs, neck, because they have that. They could sometimes have weak or somewhat broken that. They're occasionally seen with no type of diseases, which is always good. Their suggested tests that you should have once a month or every other month is on the hips, elbows, eyes, and thyroids. Their lifespan is 10 to 12 years, which is always a sad thing to learn about dogs, is they're not always gonna be with you. It's something that we learned today on the island of the Blue Dolphins when it came to run to. Very sad. For the final part of the second to final part of today, you're gonna want to know the form and function, because let's face it, you don't have kids, you don't want to have kids, so yeah, why would you have kids? I want to know the form and function of these dogs, what they look like, what they do, that type of thing. So for the form and functions of the Gordon setter is that they're the heaviest of setters, and the Gordon is certainly built in plenty of substance and bone. The suggestion would be one of strength and stamina rather than speed. It's square proportioned, upstanding, and stylish. Its gait is bold, smooth, and effortless, with head carried proudly and tail constantly flagging. The Gordon setter carries a thicker coat than the other setters. The hair is straight or slightly wavy, always soft and shiny. Longer feathering is on its ears, underside, back its legs, and tail. The whole impression would be of a rugged dog capable of withstanding a long, active day in the field in a variety of conditions. So this dog is big, exercise, big, strong dog. And you're always going to want to keep this dog active. Always, always, always. So before we call it a day today, it's time for the At a Glance 5-star review. So 5 stars means it is the best, no questions asked. Or it is one of the better ones. 4 means it's better than average. 3 means it's might as well be average. 2 means it's under average. And 1 means it's below average. Or really, really below average. All these scores could be good. All these scores could be bad, depending on which one it is. So, without further ado, let's get to the proper rankings. The energy level, exercise requirements, and affection level of the Gordon setter is at a 4. So this dog has a good amount of energy, a good amount of love to give, and a good amount of exercise requirements. Like I said, it's sometimes good, sometimes bad. So this dog is going to need some ample exercise. The playfulness of this dog is at a 3, so it's as playful as any other dog. Be nice to it, it'll be nice to you. The friendliness towards other dogs is at a 2, so watch for that. The friendliness towards other pets, however, is at a 4, which kind of doesn't make sense, but at the same time kind of does, because they might not be friends to other dogs because they could be aggressive, but they might be friends with a cat because, they're always aggressive, so they're not going to know the difference. Their friendliness towards strangers is at a 2, which could be good and could be bad, depending on what stranger it is. Could be a family member, could not be. Their watchdog ability is at a 4, so they can find out who it is. I think all setters have a watchdog ability of 4, although I could be mistaken. No, it doesn't seem that I am. Now, the ease of training, protection ability, grooming requirements, cold tolerance, and heat tolerance are all at a 3. It is average. Heat and cold tolerance are average. You're not going to have to look out for them because they can easily get through the heat and the cold just fine. The protection ability is one of the highest of the setters so far, so that's always good. And, they're decently easy to train. They're average. They're an average ease of training, which is always very, very good. But, yeah. Besides from that, the next dog we're going to be reading about is something you'll find out in the next episode. And I think it's also the last setter, which kind of works out because we're also on the... Yep, it is the last setter. Because it works out because we're also on the final set of these stories. So, hope you guys have a fantastic, wonderful day. Be polite, be efficient, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time for the end of the Island of the Blue Dolphins. Bye-bye!